coming up next, and I see Adam is ready for us. All right, so Adam Berenbak, and I hope I am pronouncing that correctly, is an archivist with the National Archives Center for Legislative Archives in Washington, D.C. He has been a member of SABR for over a decade, and his research focuses on the history of baseball in Japan, on which he has published articles in the SABR Baseball Research Journal and Our Game, curated an exhibition with the Japanese Embassy's Cultural Center in DC, and contributed to a number of articles and books. He has also published several essays on other topics related to baseball history in Baseball Research Journal, Prologue, and ZISC, and he curated an exhibition on tobacco cards in conjunction with the Museum of Durham History and the Durham Bulls Athletic Park. His work was featured in newly released SABR books on Jackie Robinson and U.S. tours of Japan. So I turn it over to Adam, who will give us a brief overview of women's professional baseball in Japan, 1949 to 1969.
Great. Thanks so much, Lisa. Let me share my screen real quick here. Sorry, I have to go through a permission process apparently, so just give me 1 second here. Now let's try one more time. There we go.
All right. Got it.
All right. And let's go to open up for slideshow here. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Thanks, Lisa. And thank you to SABR and the IWBC, especially Leslie, for fitting me into the schedule. I've really enjoyed, a real privilege to be able to speak to everybody, and I've really enjoyed all the panels that I've been able to see so far. I haven't seen quite as many as I would have liked. As Lisa mentioned, I work at the U.S. National Archives in D.C., and as some of you may have seen, we've been going through this ugly shutdown procedure for the past few days, and so my time has been divided between baseball and shutdown. But as of about an hour ago, it looks like we're going to be back in business. So now I can focus right on baseball. So I was an author on Nichibai Yakyu, as Lisa mentioned, and I've written or edited and read almost all of the English language histories on Japanese baseball, and yet I've rarely, if ever, come across references to women's play, let alone women's professional baseball. There is an article published in the early 90s in a magazine called Intersect Japan, and there's a very short chapter in Sayori Guthrie Shimisu's Trans-Pacific Field of Dreams on the subject, but otherwise not much at all. So I'd like to, in the future, write a more formal piece and also shepherd through a translation of the kind of seminal Japanese history by Masako Taniyuki. But for now, and I've got a little show and tell later to show off not just this, but a couple baseball cards. I really enjoyed the baseball card discussion earlier in one of the panels, and so I've got a few little show and tells when I'm done. But right now, I'm going to just give you a general overview of the history of women's baseball in Japan. Move past her for a second. Though established in Yokohama and Tokyo in the early 1870s, baseball in Japan had no pro leagues until 1935, when the Yomiuri Shimbun founded the Giants in the wake of the immense popularity of the 1934 tour featuring Babe Ruth. You can see the poster there in the middle of the slide. Several more teams were formed, all by corporations, and a league began play in 1936. Pro baseball was suspended during the war due to resource shortages, but also the wartime government's purge of all things American. So when U.S. occupation forces took over, led by the AP office, they nurtured pro baseball as an economic as well as a diplomatic tool. There's a tour of the San Francisco Seals and Lefty O'Doul, and you can see on the slide the image of occupation era a Japanese baseball magazine featuring Lefty there, showcased the popularity of the league. And in 1950, it had expanded to 2 leagues World Series. So this was essentially the environment into which women's pro baseball emerged. Dating back to its earliest history, Japanese women participated in watching and playing baseball as much the same fashion as women in the U.S. There were, on both sides of the Pacific, constraints on girls' play in the late 19th and early 20th century, but by 1918, there were high school teams formed in Japan, and by 1921, entertainment and club teams, not dissimilar though, not professional, to the bobbies, so you can see in the top of the slide there, towards the bobbies who toured Japan in 1923. In the wake of the 34 tour, Ginza servers and showgirls formed competitive clubs all around Tokyo. If not for the aforementioned wartime ban on baseball, it's possible that something similar to the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League might have formed or been established. However, by 1946, there were amateur women's clubs all over Japan. And I just want to take a minute. I think it's worth taking a moment to examine the circumstances and adversity and status of women in post-war Japan. Facing unimaginable economic and familial hardships, there was also a new constitution founded on gender equality that upended many cultural and legal norms, including the right to vote. Though there are myriad ways historians have evaluated these changes, or challenges, I should say, either as an overreach of Western occupation forces values to attempt to quote unquote civilize the uncivilized, an altruistic attempt to guide a gender equality movement that had already been established in the pre-war era, or Cold War imperial feminism. And all of these, of course, deserve their own talk. But needless to say that women, and especially working women in Japan, face challenges not easily comprehensible today. And I think everybody can see all the slides here. But one specific example of those challenges and upended norms were what are sometimes referred to as the Ginza taxi dancers, who would wait to be essentially paid or rented as dance partners, most often by American GIs. In particular, at a dance hall called the Marigold, and you can see a poster for the Marigold, the Miss Nippon contest at the Marigold. That's where our story begins. So in August of 1947, the Yokohama Cultural Festival featured games between women's baseball teams, the Yokohama Girls Commercial and High School team, the Bunju team, the Nihon Victor Corporation team, and the Ohio Shoe Club team. And due to its great success, I can't remember exactly how many, but 5,000 or 6,000 spectators all paid to watch. Goro Koizumi, a former movie theater operator and promoter, as well as the operator of the Marigold Club, organized a team of what we refer to in the press as baseball-minded dancers. The Marigold team and the Ohio Club toured Japan in 1948. Whether or not they were salaried is a little bit unclear, whether they were simply just a purely amateur status. But during this time, Koizumi formed a third team composed of players from the Marigold and the Yokohama commercial team. He named them the Bluebird. And I think it's possibly because the Shirley Temple movie Bluebird was very popular at that time in Japan. And it's very possible that he was trying to capitalize on that success. But the original Bluebird team folded amid financial constraints. along with arguments with local promoters. But in the summer of 1949, with the sponsorship of Romance magazine, I'm going to go one slide further so I can show you the cover to one issue of Romance magazine at the bottom of the screen there. A sponsorship for Romance magazine, and after a public tryout with over 500 individuals showing up to try out, Koizumi established a team called the Romance Bluebird, with former giant Ichiro Yamamoto as mayor, and this was effectively the first professional team. In December of 1949, second team, the Tokyo Red Sox, was formed with assistance from Koizumi, and by March of 1950, two more teams, the Homers, affiliated with the Homer Confectionery Organization, and the Pearls, who were affiliated with a local resort and tourism promoter, were also formed. Quickly thereafter, on March 28th of 1950, the Japan Women's Baseball Federation was organized and incorporated with local, or I guess not necessarily local politician, Tonijiro Okuba as president, with games set to start a month later. So on Monday, April 10th, 1950, on the exact 4th anniversary of women receiving the right to vote in Japan, and at the very start of Tokyo's Women's Week, the first games were played with the Romance Bluebird women winning a mini tournament and star pitcher Masako Oshima taking the MVP honors. And I think you can see her in the middle of the photo on the left of the screen there. So the teams toured Japan. They played roughly over 2,200 games. And the popularity of those games inspiring a dozen new teams to be founded during the course of the year, including the Nagoya Rainbow, the Wakamoto Flavins, and the Keihan Giants. And new stars emerged as well. So like Oshima, you can see here, she was called the Iron Beauty. That nickname came from her durability. She was known to pitch many complete games in a row, similar to another pitcher who came later in Japan named Kazuhiro Inao, who was known as the Iron Man for doing similar feats of pitching. Toshiki Seki, who is known as Miss Baseball. Amiko Shima, who is the speedster for the Homers, and the Pearls fastballer Akiko Kobayashi. So by the end of 1950, multiple teams were jockeying to be in the federation. And that's a ticket to one of the games from, I believe, 1950. So at the same time, the Red Sox became sponsored by the Sankyu Corporation, and the corporate sponsors came together to shape the direction of the league. The focus on purity and health benefits of women's sports, and less on the entertainment and professional aspect of it, was put forth. This put the corporate sponsors at odds with Koizumi. And by September, the Romance Bluebird had folded. Unclear whether they were forced to fold or whether there were other circumstances. But many of those players went on to play with the new Wakamoto Flavins team. So the new 1951 season also began on April 1st with the Okada Batteries, the A1 Dragons, the Sankyu Red Sox, the Wakamoto Flavins, the Keihan Giants, and the Pearls. They played a first half and second half season with Okada and Wakamoto each winning one half, and those teams then met for a championship game at the end of the season. I believe there's also an all-star game that was played. Highlights of the season included Keiko Tanabe. She was the ace of the Batteries, pitching a perfect game against the Giants. And then she was also the winning pitcher in the championship game over Wakamoto. So this brings us to Showa 27, which we know as 1952, a season that would see significant changes to the structure of the league. It's worth noting that the U.S. occupation ended in April of that year. So though the makeup of the teams remained similar, the league model transitioned from one in which the players were paid and making a salary as ball players to one in which they would be paid employees of the company, working as clerks and such, and considered amateur or corporate baseball players, or I guess industrial league players. And in a move similar to the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, and one which illustrated, I think, the philosophical differences between the corporate officers and Koizumi, it was made known in the press that the players were now given weekly lessons in flower arrangement, tea ceremony, and dressmaking. The teams as stood in 1952 were the Okada Batteries, who won the Governor's Cup that year, the Sankyo Red Sox, the A1 Pomade A1s, the Wakamoto Flavins, the KN Giants, and they were later joined by the Sakeochi Okima and the Kobai Candy Corporation. And Kobai Candy also was big in producing some of the earliest Japanese baseball cards in 1950 and 1951 to go along a lot with a lot of the Menko sets produced by toy companies. So between 1953 and 1959, the league saw a great deal of fluctuation with new teams regularly replacing the old, and stars such as Keiko Tanabe and Masako Kimshu retiring. By 1959, the Japan Women's Federation had officially become the Japan Women's Baseball Association. There would be 4 semi-hardball teams and 4 rubber ball teams, and it's hard to tell whether these were treated as a minor league or whether they were playing against each other at certain points in the exhibition games. But the 4 hardball teams were the Salonpas, who had absorbed most of the Wakamoto Flavins team, the Sankyo team, the Keihin Kyoko, and the Hakamoto team. So during the course of the 1960s, some of those teams were replaced by other corporate teams led by the Gold Key Foods Corporation, the Ricoh Watch, and the Nikka Whiskey Corporations as well. So Sankyo were 5-time champions. With the star of the league, Amika Owada, you can see there holding her bat. After that, the Salonpas were 5-time champions as well. And I can always go back to any of these slides if anybody wants to see them more in depth, or I can share this with anybody who reaches out to me. The Salonpas team not only were 5-time champs, but they toured Asia in 1959, South America in 1967, along with a number of other tours throughout the 60s. But by 1966, all but 2 of these teams had folded, and Sankyo limped along a few more years before disbanding in 1970. With no one left to play, the Salonpas team folded the following year in 1971. So I put my email address up here, as well as my personal email, my work, as well as personal, with the anticipation that I wouldn't have access to my work email if the government shut down. But now you can have both. Let me stop sharing here for a moment. And so, like I said, I just wanted to also do a quick little show and tell, not just of this book, which I believe is just a fascinating book, but of course limited in its accessibility due to its any language barriers. But this is Masako Tanioka's complete history of the league, and it also delves into what looks to be a reunion that was held in 1983 that I think is similar to the All-American Girls Baseball League reunion that was held around that same time. And then I also wanted to jump in quickly with 2 baseball cards because as I said, I enjoyed the talk earlier and talking about some of the design aspects and cards. But this is the only card that I've ever identified that is a Japanese baseball card from the 50s that features women baseball players. The kanji and katakana, the top, roughly translate to women or young women or girls team. And you can see there's a pitcher throwing the ball in. And this was from a set that featured other amateur and high school and college players that weren't named necessarily, but it definitely seems to stem from the Japanese Baseball Federation of 1950. And then also I thought I'd just share this Allison Nakin card as well because it's a great card. So that said, that's all I have, but I'm happy to entertain any questions. I see, let me open up my chat here. There we go. Emails in the chat. Here we go. Interested in this topic. Well, Leslie, thanks for the question. And also, it's great to be able to have a chance to hang out with you in Cooperstown. It's a great place to just talk baseball all day long. But I originally became interested in Japanese baseball in general through Japanese literature. And then as I was researching some Japanese literature and some details for a story that I was writing, I came across not just some stories about Sadahara O, but also some of his baseball cards. So that actually transitions well to Marlene's question about the cards as well. So as I started to look a little bit more into the history of Japanese baseball cards, I just fell in love with the entire history and culture of the sport itself, and wanted to learn as much as possible, and set about researching and of course then writing what I found and discovered. And in doing so, also developed a relationship with Rob Fitz, who writes a lot of the English Japanese baseball history volumes, such as Bonsai Babe Ruth, and a lot of other topics about Mashi. So as that progressed and learning more and more, I just noticed at a certain point that there was no reference to any women's leagues or teams, even though I knew that they existed. And so of course, I also came across this volume. I was an intern at the Baseball Hall of Fame back in 2008. And as I perused, I was an intern in the library there. So as I was perusing the library, looking for materials related to Japanese baseball, I came across that volume. And so between that and sort of not really being able to discover any English language sources that really had any information, I set about also trying to discover what I could, and then set about possibly putting that into some sort of project or writings. And so this is what developed out of it. The cards themselves are interesting. I'm just looking at the Japanese anime question, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the cards too. So that's the only one that I've been able to come across, but I know there are currently professional leagues in Japan, and there are a couple companies that produce cards in Japan, including Topps, although I think they were recently bought out by Fanatics. But BBM and Calbee also produce cards, and I have only come across a few here and there that feature women. I don't really know of any actual comprehensive sets, but that is something that I'm very interested in discovering now that I'm that question has been posed to me. So I'm going to look more into it. But otherwise, the Menko card that you saw here is basically it's the type of card that is was most well distributed in Japan between 1946 the mid 1950s. They're referred to as Menko cards because they derive from an old Japanese kids game called Menko that originally started with clay discs that eventually were turned into cardboard. And if anybody remembers the game Pogs, it's very similar. They're designed to be flipped. They're designed to have lottery numbers on the back, and they're designed to be able to teach kids to match up their kanji with their katakana. So they're really fascinating and beautiful, and there's a lot of good literature out there about them. So, and then let's see. I don't know exactly how much it builds off of it. So in terms of the Japanese anime, so obviously, baseball anime in Japan dates back to the 40s and 50s and 60s, and of course 60s anime about men's baseball and boys high school baseball in Japan was very popular. As the Japan Women's Baseball Association folded in the late 60s and early 70s, there were other semi-pro and other amateur and club teams that did continue to play, and I believe in high school as well. And I know there are some of the anime episodes that focus on girls baseball, but I don't know exactly what they are. There's a guy named Ryan Holmberg who's really he's a manga historian, but he's also really up on a lot of the relationship between baseball, manga, and anime, and he's a fascinating individual to talk to as well. I'm trying to think if he's presenting anytime soon, but Leslie, I'll share his name with you, and he's a great person to reach out to. Any other questions, either through the chat, or if anybody's, feel free to shout out and interrupt me.
Right, yeah, Adam more or less moderated his own presentation.
I thought I'd give you a break, Lisa. You know, it's like you've been working hard, so you know.
I appreciate it.
And good news about no shutdown. Thank you.
Yes.
Amen. Yes.
We got 45 days to work it out.
Thank you.
Which means, though, that means I got to go to work Monday morning. So I was kind of looking forward to, you know.
There's always a setback and a downside. But
thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. And thanks again, Leslie and Lisa. Really great. Everything's great today. So appreciate it.